There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize silence is no longer an option. For her, that moment came when the world tried to strip away her voice. They told her she was too much. They mocked her words, doubted her feelings, and tried to convince her that her truth didn't matter. They hoped that by dismissing her, she would dismiss herself. They thought that if they ignored her long enough, she would shrink into the background and stay quiet, but they underestimated her, because when they tried to silence her, she did the very thing they feared the most. She spoke louder. She spoke louder not just with her words, but with her courage, her actions, her fire, and her refusal to disappear. And in doing so, she uncovered truths about strength that every single one of us can learn from. When people tried to silence her, it wasn't because she was small, weak, or insignificant. It was because she carried something powerful inside her. That's the part no one tells you. If your voice didn't matter, no one would fight to mute it. People don't waste energy on something meaningless. They don't gather their doubts, their criticisms, and their attacks against something that doesn't threaten them. They only do that when they feel a force that makes them uncomfortable, when your truth exposes what they'd rather hide, when your strength unsettles the parts of them they cannot face. That's why they tried to silence her. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she was saying something that mattered. And that's why the first thing she had to learn, the first thing all of us must learn, is that opposition is not proof of weakness, it's proof of power. Think about it. When have you ever seen someone try to crush a whisper that carried no weight? Nobody rushes to silence an echo in an empty room. Nobody fears a voice that blends into the noise. But when a voice rises above the noise, when it carries truth, when it shakes the walls of complacency, suddenly it becomes a target. The attempt to silence her was never about her being wrong, it was about her being effective. It was never about her being too small, it was about her being too big for the space they wanted to confine her to. And at first, she didn't understand this. At first, every bit of pushback felt like rejection. Every doubt planted by someone else became a seed she watered in her own mind. Every time someone tried to cut her down, she believed maybe they were right. Maybe her voice was too much, maybe her presence didn't belong, maybe her truth was inconvenient. But over time, she began to see something clearer. She realized that the louder the resistance grew, the more powerful her message was becoming. Because here's the truth, the things that matter most in this world will always face the strongest opposition. It's not the meaningless, empty words that people rise against. It's the ones that carry the power to change something. The irony is that the very people who tried to silence her were actually the ones proving how powerful she was. Their efforts were a mirror reflecting her influence. They thought by resisting her they were diminishing her, but in reality they were validating her, and this is the shift we all need to embrace. What if, instead of seeing criticism as rejection, you saw it as evidence that you are moving in the right direction? What if, instead of shrinking in the face of doubt, you saw it as a signal that you are shaking something deep inside people? She started to test this new perspective in her own life. Every time someone tried to question her, every time someone attempted to drown her out, she paused and asked herself, why does this threaten them? What part of my truth makes them so uncomfortable? And each time she asked that question, she found herself growing stronger, not weaker. She found herself less willing to retreat and more determined to rise. Because she realized that if her words had the power to stir discomfort, they also had the power to stir change. There's a universal lesson in that for all of us. We spend so much of our lives trying to avoid opposition. We fear the moment someone raises a hand against us, someone questions us, someone dismisses us. But what if that opposition is actually the clearest sign that we are on the right path? What if it is life's way of saying, yes, this matters, yes, this shakes the ground, yes, keep going? She came to understand that people don't try to silence weakness. They try to silence strength, they try to silence authenticity, they try to silence courage, because courage is contagious, authenticity is disruptive, and strength challenges everything built on weakness. And once she saw this, she no longer ran from the resistance, she embraced it. She stopped seeing silence as the goal and began seeing opposition as the compass pointing her toward her purpose. Imagine this for a moment in your own life. Think of the times you faced pushback. Maybe it was when you spoke your truth in a relationship and suddenly the other person tried to dismiss you or make you feel like you were overreacting. Maybe it was at work when you dared to bring a new idea forward and instead of being celebrated, you were told to stay in your lane. Maybe it was when you expressed who you really are and the people around you tried to shame you back into a version of yourself that kept them comfortable. In those moments, it's so easy to believe that resistance means we should retreat. But what if it means we should rise? What if it means that your voice is carrying a weight they cannot ignore? She learned to reframe rejection. Instead of taking it as a sign to stop, she took it as proof she was onto something. She learned to reframe criticism. Instead of letting it poison her self-belief, she used it as fuel to refine her voice, to sharpen her truth, to grow louder. And the most important part, she learned to stop taking resistance personally, because often it wasn't about her. It was about the parts of them that couldn't handle what she reflected back to them. It was about the fears they hadn't dealt with, the lies they didn't want exposed, the shadows they didn't want illuminated. Her voice was just the spotlight. This shift changed her life, because once you stop fearing opposition, you stop giving your power away. Once you see resistance as validation, you stop begging for acceptance. Once you understand that people only try to silence what matters, you stop questioning whether your voice is worthy of being heard. But let's be real, knowing this doesn't make the experience painless. It still stings when people dismiss you. It still hurts when you feel misunderstood. It still takes courage to keep speaking when people are trying to quiet you. She had her moments of doubt. She had nights where she cried, mornings where she felt like giving up, afternoons where the weight of it all seemed too heavy. But every time she considered retreating, she remembered this truth. If they are trying to silence me, it's because I matter. If they are resisting me, it's because I am powerful. If they are pushing me down, it's because I am rising. And that thought gave her the fire to keep going. Over time, she began to see opposition not as a barrier, but as a signpost. Each attempt to silence her was another reminder of the impact she was having. Each piece of resistance was another confirmation that her voice was making waves. And the louder the resistance became, the louder she chose to speak. Not because she enjoyed the fight, but because she knew her voice wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had been told to stay quiet, for everyone who believed their voice didn't matter, for everyone who needed to see that silence is not the answer. And that's where the story turns from personal to universal, because the truth is, all of us will face moments where we are silenced. All of us will face people who try to mute us, minimize us, or make us disappear. But those moments are not signs of our weakness. They are signs of our power. They are reminders that we carry something inside us worth fighting for. And in those moments, we get to make a choice. Do we shrink? Or do we rise? Do we whisper? Or do we speak louder? She chose louder. And in that choice, she discovered the strength she never knew she had. She discovered that opposition wasn't her enemy. It was her greatest teacher. It showed her that her voice carried weight, that her truth had value, that her presence was undeniable. And the louder she spoke, the more she inspired others to do the same. So the next time someone tries to silence you, pause before you retreat. Ask yourself, why are they so afraid of my voice? What truth am I carrying that they don't want to hear? And then, instead of shrinking, choose to rise, because the world doesn't silence whispers, it silences fire. And if they're trying to silence you, it's only because you are burning too brightly for them to ignore. And here's the most powerful part. Every attempt to silence you is not just opposition, it's confirmation. Confirmation that you are not small, you are not weak, you are not invisible, you are powerful, and the world always tries to silence power before it fully rises, so let them try, let them resist, let them doubt. Every voice raised against you is just proof of the impact you carry, and instead of letting it dim you, let it ignite you. Instead of letting it push you back, let it push you forward, because you were never meant to live quiet. You were never meant to blend in, you were never meant to disappear, you were meant to rise, and when they try to silence you, don't whisper, don't retreat, don't vanish, speak louder. She once believed silence was safety. She believed that if she stayed quiet, she could avoid conflict, keep the peace, and protect herself from judgment. She thought that shrinking her voice would shield her from pain, that biting her tongue would make life easier, that blending in would protect her from standing out. Silence became her armor, but what she didn't realize was that it was also her prison. The very thing she thought was protecting her was slowly destroying her. Every word she swallowed left a scar. Every truth she buried became a weight pressing heavier on her chest. Silence wasn't safety, it was suffocation. At first, silence felt easier than arguing, easier than being misunderstood, easier than facing the risk of rejection. She told herself, what's the point of speaking if no one listens? So she hid her feelings, muted her opinions, and convinced herself that being quiet was strength. She mistook avoidance for peace. She mistook silence for control. But deep down, she knew the truth. Every time she silenced herself, a part of her faded away. Every time she chose not to speak, she was teaching herself that her voice didn't matter. And the more she taught herself that, the smaller she became. The danger of silence is subtle. It creeps in slowly. At first, it feels like compromise. You tell yourself you're just keeping the peace. You tell yourself you're being wise, that you're avoiding unnecessary battles. But over time, that compromise becomes a habit, and that habit becomes your identity. You wake up one day realizing you've been living muted. You've built a life where you exist, but you don't fully live, and that's where she found herself. Living a life where her truth was hidden, her fire was dimmed, and her soul was starving for expression. She thought silence would protect her from rejection, but it only made her reject herself. She thought silence would protect her from judgment, but it only made her judge herself more harshly. She thought silence would protect her from pain, but it only created a different kind of pain. The pain of self-betrayal, because there is no wound deeper than the one you inflict when you abandon your own truth. The turning point came when she realized that silence didn't stop the world from hurting her. It just stopped her from defending herself. It didn't stop people from misunderstanding her. It just stopped her from being understood. It didn't stop others from defining her, it just stopped her from defining herself. Silence was not a shield, it was chains, and she was the one holding the key, so she decided to speak. At first, her voice was soft, trembling, uncertain. It wasn't about roaring or shouting, it was about reclaiming her right to exist, to express, to take up space, and with every word she spoke, she felt a piece of herself return. With every truth she voiced, she felt lighter. With every moment, she chose to be real instead of silent. She found strength she didn't know she had. She realized that speaking wasn't dangerous. Staying quiet was, because quiet was killing her spirit in slow motion. Here's the paradox of silence. When you stay quiet to keep the peace, you lose your inner peace. When you hold back to protect yourself, you end up hurting yourself more. When you bury your truth to avoid conflict, the biggest conflict becomes the one raging inside you. She lived with that inner war for too long, and it cost her dearly. Her silence cost her opportunities. It cost her respect. It cost her relationships that might have thrived if she had dared to be honest. But most of all, it cost her the relationship with herself, and that was the one loss she couldn't accept anymore. The day she spoke louder, it wasn't about rebellion. It was about survival. It was about saving herself from disappearing into a version of life that wasn't truly hers. She realized that her voice wasn't just a tool, it was her lifeline. Her freedom depended on it, her self-respect depended on it, her entire future depended on it. Silence might have felt safe in the short term, but in the long term it was stealing everything from her. And she decided she would rather face the discomfort of being heard than the destruction of never being known. Speaking louder didn't suddenly make the world applaud her. It didn't suddenly erase judgment or criticism. But what it did do was bring her peace, the kind of peace silence had always promised but never delivered. Because there is nothing more freeing than knowing you are no longer betraying yourself. There is nothing more powerful than realizing you can stand in your truth, even if it shakes the ground beneath you. She began to understand that life isn't about being accepted by everyone, it's about being authentic with yourself. And authenticity requires a voice. She stopped asking, what if they don't like it? And started asking, what if I don't like myself if I stay silent? That shift changed everything. Because the truth is, people may disagree with you, they may reject you, they may resist you. But none of that is as dangerous as what happens when you reject yourself, and that's why silence can never truly be safety. Safety isn't hiding from the world. Safety is standing in it, fully alive, fully present, fully expressed. Safety isn't erasing yourself to avoid conflict. Safety is knowing you have your own back, no matter who stands against you. The lesson she carried forward was this: silence is the slow death of the soul. And speaking, no matter how messy, no matter how shaky, no matter how risky, is the act that keeps you alive. She chose to speak louder, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Because her life was too precious to be lived in whispers. Because her truth was too powerful to stay buried. Because her voice was too important to remain hidden. And in choosing to speak, she gave herself permission to live again. She stopped being the background and started being the main character of her own story. She stopped betraying herself and started building herself. She stopped asking for permission and started giving herself freedom. So if you've been silencing yourself, if you've been convincing yourself that quiet is protection, understand this: silence doesn't protect you. It erases you, it steals you from yourself, and one day you'll look back and realize that every moment you stayed quiet was a moment you gave away a piece of your life. Don't wait for that day. Don't wait until silence has consumed too much of you. Choose now. Choose to speak louder. Choose to step out of the shadows. Choose to be heard, not hidden, because your voice is not a threat, it's a gift. Your truth is not a burden, it's freedom. Your life is not meant to be muted, it's meant to be lived in full volume. And if the choice is between the false safety of silence and the real risk of expression, always choose expression. Because silence will never save you, but your voice, your loud, unapologetic, fearless voice, just might. When she finally raised her voice, people thought she was fearless. They looked at her standing tall, speaking with conviction, and assumed she had mastered the art of confidence. But what they didn't see were the nights she lay awake, her mind racing with doubt. They didn't see the trembling in her hands when she spoke. They didn't hear the questions echoing in her head. What if I fail? What if they don't listen? What if they laugh? What if I'm not enough? She didn't step forward without fear. She stepped forward with fear sitting in the front row, watching her every move, and that was the truth she discovered. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is speaking even when your voice shakes. We live in a world that glorifies confidence. We're told to fake it until we make it, to walk into the room like we own it, to stand tall and act as if nothing scares us. And while confidence is powerful, it's not where the journey begins. The journey begins with fear. Fear is that knot in your stomach, that lump in your throat, that trembling in your voice. Fear is natural, fear is human, and fear is proof that you are standing on the edge of something meaningful. She realized that fear wasn't a sign she was weak. It was a sign she was about to grow. At first, she thought she had to wait until fear disappeared before she could act. She thought she had to feel ready, feel strong, feel completely certain. But readiness never came, certainty never arrived, the fear never fully left, and if she had waited for it to, she would still be silent today. She discovered that courage doesn't mean waiting for fear to vanish. It means moving forward while fear is still loud. It means speaking with the lump in your throat, acting with the butterflies in your stomach, standing tall with shaking knees. That's what courage really is. The first time she spoke louder, she felt her voice crack. She felt her chest tighten, she felt exposed, vulnerable, almost naked in front of the world. But she did it anyway, and in doing it, she learned something life-changing. Fear shrinks when you face it. Fear grows when you avoid it, but it weakens every time you step through it. The voice that once felt like it was too shaky to be heard became steadier the more she used it. The hands that once trembled began to move with certainty. The heart that once raced with panic began to beat with strength. Courage is built in the doing, not in the waiting. She also discovered that fear wasn't always her enemy. Fear was a signal. It was her body's way of telling her she was stepping into unfamiliar territory, that she was about to grow, that she was touching something important. Fear didn't mean stop. It meant pay attention. It meant this moment matters. It meant she was alive, stretching, expanding. And once she reframed fear as a compass instead of a barrier, she stopped resisting it. She began to lean into it. She began to see that every moment of fear was a doorway into a stronger, braver version of herself. People around her would say, "I wish I had your courage." They thought she was fearless, that she was born different. But what they didn't understand was that courage is not something you're born with, it's something you build. It's built in the small moments when you decide to speak up instead of staying silent, when you raise your hand even though your heart is pounding, when you tell the truth even though your voice shakes. Each of those moments stacks on top of the other, until one day you look back and realize you've become braver than you ever imagined. She realized that waiting to be fearless is a trap. So many people never speak, never act, never pursue the life they want because they're waiting for the day fear disappears. But that day never comes. If anything, the longer you wait, the stronger fear becomes. The more you hide from it, the louder it gets. She learned that the only way to quiet fear was to walk directly into it. That's why the louder she spoke, the quieter fear became. And yet, she never pretended the fear was gone. She didn't hide her trembling. She didn't hide the cracks in her voice. She understood that even a shaky voice can move mountains. Even a trembling hand can create change. Even a scared soul can make a difference. Courage wasn't about being flawless. It was about being real, and people don't connect with perfection. They connect with honesty. They connect with vulnerability. They connect with the bravery of someone who admits, "I'm scared, but I'm here anyway." Every time she chose courage over silence, she felt herself expand. She realized that courage creates freedom. When you stop letting fear dictate your choices, you free yourself to live fully. She started to see opportunities she had once hidden from. She started to attract people who respected her authenticity. She started to feel proud of herself, not because she never felt fear, but because she stopped letting fear run her life. And what's powerful is that her courage inspired others. People saw her speak louder, even while trembling, and thought, if she can do it scared, maybe I can too. Her bravery became contagious. That's the thing about courage. It doesn't just liberate you, it liberates everyone who witnesses it. By speaking louder, she gave others permission to speak too. By showing up imperfectly, she reminded others they didn't need to wait until they felt perfect. By walking with fear, she proved that fear is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of transformation. She often thought about what her life would have looked like if she had chosen silence forever. It would have been easier on the surface, no judgment, no criticism, no risk of failure, but also no growth. No breakthroughs, no real freedom. She realized that the cost of silence was far greater than the cost of courage. Silence might have protected her ego, but it would have destroyed her soul. Courage may have exposed her to fear, but it gave her back her life. And the beautiful part is this: fear never truly disappears, but that's okay, because fear isn't meant to vanish, it's meant to guide you. Every time you feel fear, it means you're standing at the edge of expansion. Every time you feel fear, it means you're about to step into a version of yourself you haven't met yet. And every time you feel fear, you have the chance to practice courage again. That's the gift of fear. It keeps offering you doorways into growth. So when her voice trembled, she no longer saw it as weakness. She saw it as evidence that she was alive, pushing herself, stepping into new ground. She embraced the cracks, the shakes, the imperfections, because she knew those were the signs of courage being born, and she learned that a shaky voice is still powerful if it carries truth. A trembling hand is still strong if it chooses action. A heart that beats fast is still brave if it refuses to quit. Courage isn't loud. It isn't always dramatic. Sometimes courage is simply showing up. Sometimes it's saying one honest sentence. Sometimes it's making one small step in the direction of your truth. That's what she realized. Courage is built in the ordinary, not the extraordinary. And the ordinary acts of courage add up to an extraordinary life. She began to live by a simple rule: do it scared, speak it scared, step forward scared. Because the goal is not to erase fear. The goal is to prove to yourself that fear will never have the final word. And with every act of courage, she built a stronger foundation for her life. She stopped living a life dictated by fear and started living a life shaped by bravery. So when she raised her voice, it wasn't because she stopped being afraid. It was because she refused to let fear silence her anymore. And that's what courage really is: showing up with fear and speaking louder anyway. And if you take anything from her story, let it be this: don't wait for the fear to go away. Don't wait to feel ready. Don't wait until your hands stop shaking or your voice feels steady. Speak now, act now, move now, because fear will always be there. But so will courage, and the louder you speak, the smaller fear becomes. She didn't wait for confidence to arrive, she built it. She didn't wait for fear to vanish, she walked with it, and in doing so, she found her freedom. She proved that courage is not about being fearless. It's about being brave enough to live fully, even when fear is standing right beside you. So if your voice shakes, let it. If your hands tremble, let them. If your heart races, let it pound. Do it anyway. Speak anyway, rise anyway, because your courage doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real. When she finally spoke louder, something unexpected happened. It wasn't just about her anymore. At first, her voice was about reclaiming her own space, about refusing to be silenced, about finding the courage to stand in her truth. But as she kept speaking, as she kept showing up, she realized that her voice carried something far bigger than her personal story. Her words began to ripple. They reached people she had never met, hearts she didn't even know were listening, souls who had been waiting for someone to say what they were too afraid to. And in that moment, she understood. Her voice was not just her weapon, it was her gift. Because every time she spoke, someone else heard their own reflection in her truth. Every time she stood taller, someone else found permission to stand too. Every time she chose honesty over silence, someone else felt less alone in their struggle. Her voice became a mirror, a lifeline, a spark. She realized that when one person dares to be loud, it lights a fire for others who are still whispering. Courage is contagious, and her courage spread. The world has always tried to convince women like her to stay quiet, to not rock the boat, to play small, to be agreeable, soft, easy to handle. But when she refused, when she spoke with power, she became living proof that those rules were never real. They were cages disguised as etiquette, silence disguised as respectability, and once she broke them, she didn't just free herself, she cracked the walls for others too. People who thought they had no power began to see that their voice mattered. People who thought no one would listen began to speak anyway. People who thought they were alone realized they weren't. Her voice had become a revolution without even trying to be, and it wasn't because she was the loudest person in the room. It wasn't because she had a perfect stage or the biggest platform. It was because she was real. She spoke from her scars, from her heart, from her truth. And authenticity has a power that perfection never will. When people listened to her, they didn't hear a rehearsed performance. They heard raw humanity, and that's what connected. That's what spread. That's what shook the silence. The beauty of it all was that she didn't have to pretend to be strong all the time. She didn't have to hide her vulnerability. In fact, the more vulnerable she was, the stronger her voice became. She realized that vulnerability is not weakness, it's strength disguised. Because when you are willing to be real, when you are willing to show the parts of yourself that aren't polished, you give others permission to do the same, and when people drop the masks, that's when true change begins. That's when real conversations happen. That's when healing starts. She started noticing the messages from people who had been inspired by her. Messages from women who said, "I finally stood up for myself because of you." Messages from men who said, "I realized I had been silent when I should have spoken, and now I'm trying." Messages from young girls who said, "You made me believe my voice matters too." That was when she fully understood the responsibility of her courage. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about the ripple. Her voice was proof that one act of bravery can echo across lives you'll never even know about, but with that power also came resistance. The louder she spoke, the more people tried to shut her down. The louder she became, the more uncomfortable others grew, and at first she thought that meant she was doing something wrong. She thought maybe she should soften her tone, maybe she should shrink a little, maybe she should go back to being quiet to avoid the backlash. But then she realized something important: resistance is proof of impact. If people are rattled, it means you've touched something real. If people try to silence you, it means your voice has power. And if your voice has power, you cannot afford to go quiet again. So instead of letting the resistance silence her, she let it fuel her. Every attempt to push her down only gave her more reason to rise. Every voice that said, "Be quiet," only reminded her of why she started speaking in the first place. She stopped taking opposition as a sign to shrink and started taking it as a sign she was on the right track. Because the truth is, silence never changes anything, but a loud, authentic, unapologetic voice can shift the ground beneath us. The more she spoke, the more she realized that her story wasn't just about survival, it was about leadership. She became a leader not because she had authority or power, but because she was willing to go first. Leadership is simply being the one brave enough to step forward so others see it's possible, and that's what she did. She went first. She showed others that you can be afraid and still speak. You can be doubted and still rise. You can be resisted and still continue, and once others saw that, they began to follow. They began to rise too. She became a reminder that your voice is not just about you. It's about the people who are silently watching, waiting for a sign that they are not alone. She carried the weight of knowing that every time she silenced herself, someone else stayed silent too, and every time she spoke, someone else found the courage to whisper, then to talk, then to roar. She became living proof that the voice of one can awaken the voices of many. She understood now that speaking louder is not just an act of defiance. It's an act of love, love for herself because she refuses to betray her own truth. Love for others because she refuses to let them believe they have to hide who they are. Love for the world because she knows change cannot happen in silence. Her loudness wasn't just noise, it was love amplified. It was truth unchained, it was freedom echoed, and that is the final piece she discovered. Your voice is not a weapon you keep to yourself. It's a gift you give to the world. When you speak louder, you don't just free yourself. You plant seeds of freedom in everyone who hears you. And you may never see the full forest that grows from those seeds, but you can trust it will grow. So when they tried to silence her, they had no idea what they were awakening. They thought they were closing her down, but they were actually unlocking her purpose. They thought they were keeping her small, but they were actually forcing her into greatness. They thought they were silencing one voice, but they didn't realize that one voice could ignite thousands more. And now when she speaks louder, she doesn't do it just for herself. She does it for the ones who still feel voiceless. She does it for the ones who are still afraid. She does it for the younger version of herself who once believed she had to stay small. She does it for every soul who needs to hear that their truth matters, that their voice matters, that their story matters. She does it because she knows silence doesn't protect anyone, but courage saves us all. So the next time someone tries to silence you, remember her. Remember that your voice may shake, but it is still powerful. Remember that your truth may make others uncomfortable, but it will liberate you. Remember that speaking louder isn't just about defiance. It's about legacy. It's about love. It's about leaving the world better than you found it. They tried to silence her, but they forgot one thing. Voices like hers don't die in silence. They rise in power. They echo in others. They outlast the noise. They become unstoppable. And when she finally spoke louder, she didn't just change her own life. She changed the lives of everyone who heard her. So when they try to silence you, remember this. Their attempt to mute you is not a signal to retreat. It's a sign to rise. Your voice matters, your truth matters, and your life is not meant to be lived in the shadows. Don't whisper, don't shrink, don't disappear. Speak louder, because the world doesn't need your silence. It needs your fire, it needs your truth, it needs your voice.